Hey guys, welcome. Tonight we drift into something timeless, like slipping into a warm bath drawn by an old soul. You're barefoot in the dust of ancient Rome, the stones still holding on to the sun's heat. The air smells like crushed olives and smoke, and in the distance, somewhere down a marble corridor, a quiet voice scratches at parchment. That's Seneca, the philosopher with a brow furrowed not just from age, but from the weight of ideas. He's writing again. He always writes at this hour. Lamplight flickers across the walls like a flame caught in thought, and you can hear the gentle creak of the wooden chair beneath him. If you tried living like a true Stoic today, your boss might block you. Seneca, after all, said things like, "Life is long if you know how to use it," which doesn't pair well with back-to-back Zoom meetings. So before we settle in, take a second to tap like or even subscribe, only if this quiet space feels like home to you. I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it? Now ease off the brightness, maybe let a soft breeze hum in the background, and let's wander gently into tonight's story together. You find yourself padding softly through the atrium of Seneca's villa. It's late, the kind of late when the city's buzz has dimmed to a murmur, and even the fountains seem to whisper. A servant passes you with a tray of wine and figs, nods without words, as if your presence here, ghost-like, is perfectly ordinary. You drift closer. Seneca doesn't look up. His hand moves steadily across the parchment. It's strange to see someone so calm. He writes like someone writing a love letter to time itself. But even he, high-born and lauded, lives with a quiet dread, the dread that all this, every statue, every scroll, every breath will vanish. The Stoics didn't believe in clinging, not to people, not to possessions, not even to your own heartbeat. Impermanence, he once wrote, is not the thief you imagine. It is the permission slip to be here fully. Still, that doesn't stop you from glancing at the villa's ornate columns and wondering how long they'll last. Spoiler, they won't. Here's the irony. Seneca, teacher of calm and detachment, lived through palace intrigue, exile, and eventually, forced suicide. Not exactly a quiet life in the hills. And yet, he kept writing, kept meditating on loss, decay, and fate's unsettling lack of an RSVP. Philosophers still debate whether his stoicism was genuine or performative. After all, can a man drenched in luxury truly renounce desire? It's a fair question, especially when your bathtub is carved from imported stone. Still, maybe that's the charm of Seneca. He didn't always succeed, but he always tried to stay steady in a world that very much wasn't. You pause by a bronze bust on a pedestal. Its eyes seem to watch you. Blink. Maybe. And you think, what if this glimmering, dreaming moment is the only permanence you'll ever touch? There's an anecdote Seneca loved to tell about the man who built a beautiful garden, only to lose it in a flood the next year. Instead of mourning it, he laughed. Because he'd had it, that was enough. Modern Stoics call this the view from above. You zoom out, you imagine your life from the clouds, petty fears, mortgage payments, mismatched socks, and they all seem smaller, more amusing. Seneca, from his desk, does just that. He smiles as he writes about how emperors and beggars end up the same ash. Not in a cruel way, in a freeing way. You're not special, and that's beautiful. It means you don't have to hold it all together. You exhale, noticing how your own breath fogs slightly in the night air. The fire crackles, a page turns, and you understand now why the villa feels so serene. Not because it's untouched by time, but because it's surrendered to it. Outside, a dog barks in the distance. Somewhere, a cart creaks along the cobblestone. Seneca dips his quill again. He's not trying to stop the world from slipping through his fingers. He's just trying to hold it gently. You're still there, beside the flickering lamplight, but the night has deepened. The stars overhead blink like they're trying to stay awake. Two, somewhere in the garden, a cicada scrapes out a rhythm, and inside the villa, someone, probably an underpaid servant, stokes the coals for tomorrow's bread. You drift now into an earlier hour. The sun is just beginning to press its golden lips against the tiled roofs of Rome. You're not exactly awake, not exactly dreaming. You're somewhere in that velvet space in between. And you're hungry. Not metaphorically, actually hungry. There's something about drifting through time and thought that stirs the appetite. You imagine yourself at Seneca's breakfast table, though table might be a generous word. No feast here, a crust of bread, a few olives, maybe some dried figs, a Stoic brunch, heavy on the humility, light on the carbs. Seneca would approve. He once wrote to his friend Lucilius, "If you wish to be well, you must root out the notion that luxury is necessary." In other words, no, you don't need oat milk foam. The funny thing is, this breakfast with its crackly bread and its single plum is a full-on philosophical statement. Each bite is a reminder that impermanence doesn't just strike with tragedy and loss, it whispers in every small comfort we ignore. This too will end, the warmth of the bread, the sting of the salt, even the sunbeam crawling across your plate. You don't get to keep them. That's not a punishment, that's the deal. Mainstream, Stoic insight. Here it is, learn to enjoy things as if you're saying goodbye to them, even as you hold them. Seneca didn't mean that in a sad, weepy, violin background kind of way. He meant it in the way you might love the last firefly of the summer, not because it stays, but because it doesn't. So this morning, your companion at the table is not Seneca, it's mortality, sitting right there, passing you a fig. And yes, that sounds dramatic, but it's also comforting. Because if this moment is already halfway gone, then maybe you can stop obsessing about how perfect it should be. Maybe it's okay that the olive is a little bitter. Maybe it's even okay that you're sitting here in rumpled sleep clothes with crumbs on your chest. Mortality doesn't mind. It just nods, serene and a little smug. Seneca liked to talk about euthymia, a quiet cheerfulness, the kind that doesn't depend on external stuff. It's like having your own personal weather system. Raining outside, who cares? Traffic's a mess. You're breezy, that's euthymia. It's not indifference, it's presence, and it's breakfast with mortality, every day. There's a fringe anecdote from Roman gossip scrolls. Yes, those existed about how Seneca once got invited to a wild nobleman's feast and refused all the delicacies. Not rudely, just didn't eat them. When asked why, he said, "I trained for hunger, because someday, hunger will come." Awkward, sure, but also weirdly baller. Here's the tension. Modern Stoics can't agree whether this is emotional detachment or emotional rehearsal. Was Seneca numbing himself to the world or savoring it differently, like a connoisseur of simplicity? Maybe both. Maybe he was just tired of everyone thinking a full stomach meant a full life. You look at your own breakfast now, real or imagined, and wonder how often you race through it. Earbuds in, thoughts elsewhere, phone screen glowing like a second sun. Seneca would have made you eat in silence, probably while contemplating death. Slightly intense, but undeniably focused. He once joked, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." And breakfast is a great example. How many mornings get ruined by a single bad email, or by replaying yesterday's awkward moment in the coffee line? Meanwhile, the toast goes cold, the world spins, and mortality just keeps sipping its fig juice, unfazed. What would it be like to wake slowly, sit simply, and greet each morning as if it might be the last, without dread, without panic, just acknowledgement? A quiet nod to the fact that even the sun's rays are on borrowed time. There's a garden just beyond the courtyard. You step outside, bread in hand. The stones are cool underfoot. A fig drops from the tree with a gentle thud. You don't pick it up. You just smile. Because you know that it's not yours. Not really. And still, it was beautiful. You're walking now. The city has stretched its limbs. A breeze twists gently through the alleyways of Rome, stirring the linen strung from upper balconies. You hear the clatter of hooves on cobblestone and the rhythmic muttering of vendors setting up stalls. Someone somewhere is late already, but not you. You've slipped into a slower current, a quiet side street where morning seems reluctant to begin. And then a rumble. Low and distant at first, like a god clearing his throat. The ground shifts subtly beneath your sandals, and pigeons lift off in a startled cloud. You look up. A storm is coming. Seneca loved storms, not for the drama, although he surely appreciated that too, but for what they reveal. He called them tests of disposition, nature's reminder that your preferences don't carry much weight. You may hope for sunshine, but weather doesn't read your calendar. Tonight's philosophical insight slips in with the first drops of rain. Fate doesn't care. It's not cruel. It's not kind. It's indifferent. And somehow, that's a comfort. Because if the storm isn't about you, it's not against you either. You duck into a covered archway just as the sky opens. Water sluices from rooftop gutters like silver ropes. You lean back against the cool stone and breathe. The air tastes like iron and wet dust. A carriage splashes past, and you wonder if Seneca ever cursed a puddle. Probably. He wasn't a robot. Still, he wrote of these storms, of how they leveled the field, how they humbled both senator and slave. You think of him again, calmly scribbling his thoughts as thunder rolls, unbothered, not because he's immune, but because he's practiced. There's an anecdote possibly apocryphal, but charming nonetheless, that Seneca once sat through a thunderstorm with a cup of wine in hand, refusing to flinch no matter how loud the gods roared. Let Jupiter hurl his bolts, he said, I still have a decent vintage. Whether he said it or not, the sentiment lands. You can't control the storm, only the posture with which you face it. But here's the scholarly tension. Did Seneca really believe in fate's total control, or was he hedging? His letters oscillate. Sometimes fate is a river, sometimes a rope, sometimes a partner in a weirdly unequal dance. Modern scholars still can't decide if he was a strict determinist or just a really poetic pragmatist. You let the rain speak for a moment. It claps off the clay tiles above you, turns the alley into a mirror, and something in you unclenches. It's funny. You've spent most of your life trying to dodge storms, literal and metaphorical. You've checked the forecast, built emotional umbrellas, worn spiritual rain boots. And now, under this stone arch, soaked to your elbows, you finally get it. There's no prize for staying dry. Seneca might say the real strength is in staying serene while wet. Of course, that's not a catchy slogan. It won't sell many t-shirts. But it lingers. You watch as a child dashes into the alley, arms wide, laughing like a lunatic. Her mother follows, not amused, but not angry either. Just resigned to the wet, to the loss of control. A chariot rolls by, its wheels hissing in the puddles, and a man in rich robes curses the sky. His toga is splattered, his dignity slightly dampened. You can't help but smile. Seneca would have loved this moment. Because it's the perfect metaphor. You can dress in silk, quote Aristotle. Even write 10 books on tranquility, but the universe will still dump a bucket on your head. That's not failure. That's curriculum. The question is, do you stomp your foot, or do you let the rain baptize your expectations? You look up again. The storm doesn't care. And that, oddly, feels like permission to exhale. to stop taking yourself so seriously, to stop thinking every drop has a message. Sometimes rain is just rain, and still, it's beautiful. Night again, or maybe it never stopped being night. This drifting realm blurs the line between dusk and dawn. You're warm now, wrapped in a blanket, body soft, breath slow. Outside, the storm has passed, leaving the air washed and quiet, like the world has just been rinsed of its troubles. The villa rests too. A few candles gutter low in their holders. Somewhere a cat stretches, unconcerned with eternity. You feel still, almost weightless. And yet, in this stillness, a strange thought flickers. Everything you love will go. You don't resist it. Seneca didn't. He built his entire philosophy on that truth that all things pass, that nothing, not even sorrow, stays forever, not joy, not despair, not your favorite mug, not your favorite person, not even you. It's a truth we normally sidestep like a pothole, but here, in this calm, sleep-hushed space, it feels oddly soothing. Because if all things pass, so does pressure, so does shame, so does the awkward thing you said at that party 8 years ago. Seneca's version of comfort was a strange one, to find peace not by clinging, but by loosening your grip entirely. He wrote to Lucilius, "What need is there to weep over parts of life? The whole of it calls for tears." But he didn't mean to cry all the time. He meant understand the rules of the game. The pieces don't last. The board will crack. Play anyway. You imagine now that you're not in a Roman villa, but in a canoe gliding downstream in a river of shadows. Every moment floats past the first time someone called your name with affection, the last time you tasted something new, the quiet that followed a loud goodbye. They drift by, and you let them. That's the practice. That's the virtue, to use Seneca's term, not moral superiority, not stoic coldness, but grace in motion. There's an old anecdote about Seneca's prize table, a heavy slab of cedar carved by a master craftsman. One day, a careless guest left it scorched from a spilled oil lamp. Seneca, according to rumor, shrugged and said, "It is a piece of wood that forgot what it was." It's unclear if he meant this literally or as a sly parable, but either way, the lesson is there. We suffer most when we mistake temporary things for permanent parts of us. You feel that now, under your blanket. You think of the friendships that faded, the plans that got postponed into oblivion, the dreams that once kept you up and now barely stir memory. And you wonder maybe they were never supposed to stay. Maybe they were just visitors, like weather or dreams. There's tension here. Of course. Some philosophers argue that this kind of thinking risks nihilism, that if nothing lasts, why care at all? If even beauty burns, why light the match? But that's where Seneca tilts the thought. He insists precisely because things end, we must love them fiercely and let them go cleanly. The rose that never wilts becomes plastic. The memory you never release becomes a burden. The breath you don't exhale, suffocation. Seneca would likely have hated modern storage units. What are we keeping all this for? He might ask, gesturing at rows of boxes marked winter clothes and college books and mist. Do you think immortality comes in bubble wrap? You chuckle. A moth flutters past the candle. Your eyes feel heavier. And that truth, once heavy, now feels like a feather. All this will pass. But that doesn't mean it wasn't worth it. It means it was extra worth it. Because you never had to have it at all. You sip some water real or imagined and savor the absurdity of it all. You, lying here, contemplating cosmic impermanence in your pajamas. Seneca, somewhere in time, nodding in approval or maybe raising an eyebrow. Either way, the current carries you on. Let it. The villa's fire crackles low now, just ember and whisper. Outside, the sky holds that deep indigo hue that arrives just before sunrise, or perhaps just after a dream. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster offers a half-hearted crow, as if unsure whether it's too early or too late. You're seated at a modest wooden table. The grain is uneven, worn smooth by time and elbows. Before you rest a bowl of lentils. Steam rises gently, curling into the cool air. There's no feast here, no gilded platters or overflowing goblets, just simplicity, seasoned with something harder to name dignity, maybe, or wisdom. Seneca, if legend serves, ate like this by choice. He had access to luxury banquets, fine wines, dishes whose names alone cost more than your rent, but often opted for lentils and barley, not because he was frugal, but because he was training. Not his stomach, his soul. That's the insight tonight. A quiet life, consistently chosen, is stronger than a loud life occasionally endured. Seneca wrote, "A man is as miserable as he thinks he is, and misery, it seems, often arrives with the second course. You take a spoonful, it's surprisingly satisfying. Beside the bowl lies a small scroll, half open, one of Seneca's many letters to Lucilius. He wrote them almost compulsively, dozens of meditations scribbled in candlelight, long musings on life, death, wealth, boredom, cruelty, peace, the occasional goat. These letters weren't just correspondence, they were breadcrumbs. He knew he was walking into the unknown, and he wanted to leave a trail. That's the quirk in all this. The man who warned against legacy, who said even tombstones crumble, also wrote obsessively, knowing he might be remembered. It's a bit like writing your own goodbye note every day and folding it carefully into the future's coat pocket. Here's a favorite line: cling tooth and nail to the following rule: not to give in to adversity, never to trust prosperity, and always take full note of fortune's habit of behaving just as she pleases. That's stoicism in a spoonful. You don't control fortune, you just adjust the recipe when she changes the ingredients. There's a lesser-known story about Seneca attending a feast thrown by Nero, his volatile student. It was an orgy of excess dancers, gold-dusted figs, fountains of perfume. Seneca ate nothing, said little, left early. One servant claimed, he muttered, "The stomach is less treacherous when empty." It's unclear if this was a critique of gluttony or of court politics. Probably both. Either way, it reveals something central to Stoic thought. External chaos doesn't require internal participation. You chew another mouthful slowly. The lentils are earthy, honest, and they last longer than extravagance ever does. Modern Stoics argue over how to live this out. Can you really practice minimalism in a consumer society without becoming smug? Can detachment coexist with genuine engagement? Is buying oat milk in bulk a betrayal of ancient virtue? No consensus. But Seneca offers a clue. It's not what you own, but how tightly you grip it. You look around the room now. It's humble, sparse, a clay cup, a wooden stool, a single candle with a halo of moths. And yet it feels full? Because you're not distracted. Because nothing here is louder than your thoughts. You think of all the noise you carry daily, notifications, metrics, group chats, the obsession with making something of yourself. Seneca would scoff. You already are something, he'd say, just sit with it. Maybe lentils weren't just dinner. Maybe they were a ceremony, a ritual of return, of making peace with what's small, quiet, and enough. You place the spoon down. You sit with the silence. You feel oddly nourished. The candle is nearly gone now, wax pooling like memory, slow and shapeless. Shadows stretch longer than they should, as if even darkness is tired. You rise from the table and wander through the cool halls of the villa. Your bare feet kiss stone that has outlived empires. You find yourself in a quiet courtyard where the moon paints silver over stone. There's a statue here chipped, dignified, faceless, a philosopher or emperor no one quite remembers, and that, perhaps, is the point. Seneca once wrote, "A great mind becomes a kingdom unto itself, a place no enemy can storm, no time can erode, no fire can raise, and you stand here now, looking inward, wondering what your own kingdom looks like. Is it crumbling under self-doubt or still under construction, perpetually in progress?" He wasn't talking about ego, though. That's the twist. Seneca didn't want you to build a throne. He wanted you to build calm. He believed your mind could be the one place that doesn't sway when the world shouts. The empire inside you, if well built, doesn't need guards, or gates, or approval. But, and here's where it gets spicy. Seneca didn't always live by his own blueprint. He served under Nero, a man who made sociopaths look restrained. He amassed incredible wealth, owned properties sprawling enough to make minimalism wince. So how do you square this Stoic serenity with the Senate salary? That's the scholarly tension. Was Seneca a hypocrite, or just doing his best inside a broken system? Some say he compromised. Others say he navigated danger with dignity, choosing the influence he could have over the purity he couldn't keep. But his writings, they never flinch. They say over and over, build inward. Because outward things, fortunes, fates, even countries slip away like mist over a Roman bath. There's a tale of Seneca walking alone in the Sabine hills, refusing all guards or escorts, who would attack a man who carries nothing worth stealing. He joked. He pointed at his head. The treasure's in here, and thieves have no key. Tonight, your own thoughts feel a little lighter, a little less defended. You're not battling regrets or plotting distractions. You're just here, in the courtyard of your own attention. You touch the statue's base, smooth, cold, imperfect. The empire inside you doesn't need to be polished. It needs to be quiet. Not silent, not passive, just sturdy, able to weather the noise, able to breathe through the rush, able to say, gently but firmly, "No, that's not mine to carry." You step back and look around. The vines curling over the stone archway seem to move in time with your breath. The sky above is wide and humbling. You are one heartbeat among billions, one breath among history, and yet undiminished. Seneca would say you are enough, not because you've earned it, but because you were always meant to be. You sit now on the edge of a fountain. Its water trickles like thought itself, constant, quiet, self-renewing. And for a moment, you feel it. The empire inside you, unshaken, unclaimed, unbreakable. The stars tilt as you rise. Time has lost its sharp edges. You walk now through a corridor lined with tall, narrow windows. The air smells of parchment and olive oil, and a single moth flutters lazily in your path, as if to remind you freedom doesn't always mean flying fast. A door stands ahead, its old iron ringed and stubborn. You press it open and step into a smaller room. Bare walls, a stool, a robe hung carelessly over a nail. That's all. And still, it feels like enough. This was Seneca's study, or perhaps just a dream of it. The place where he returned not to escape the world, but to remember he was never truly trapped in it. The insight here is subtle but bold. Freedom doesn't start with circumstance. It starts in the mind. Seneca would say you could be surrounded by luxury and still be a slave, or sit in chains and still be sovereign. Because freedom isn't about options, it's about detachment. That's the key difference Stoicism makes. It's not about what you can do, it's about what you're not owned by. A soft rustle breaks your thought. A slave enters the room not in chains, but in silence. His name is Gaius. He's a minor figure in history, but a major presence here. Seneca once mentioned him in a letter not as property, but as teacher. Gaius had nothing, and yet he was always calm. Seneca, frustrated, once asked him why he didn't complain more. Gaius replied, "What would I complain from? I've never owned anything that wasn't lent." That sentence has haunted scholars ever since. It reveals a paradox: the one who owns least may carry the least fear. Seneca often wrote of this, the idea that true freedom isn't granted, it's realized. You can be in a palace, but if your peace depends on things staying exactly as you want, you're caged. The bars are just invisible. But here's the wrinkle: some modern thinkers critique this view. They argue that freedom without external justice is a fantasy, that telling the poor they can be mentally free is like offering poetry to someone starving. It's a real tension. Can a philosophy born in marble halls apply to a world of inequality? Maybe, if we don't use it as an excuse to ignore suffering, but as a guide to endure it with grace. You look again at the room. It lacks everything you're told to desire. There's no velvet, no titles on the wall, just space and breath and presence. Seneca once said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." But what he didn't say out loud, what maybe only Gaius knew, is that mastering yourself isn't a battle, it's a surrender. You stop trying to fix everything. You stop trying to hold everything. You stop needing the world to behave. You just sit. The stool creaks beneath you. Dust floats in the moonlight, and you realize the door wasn't locked. It never was. The lion's cage is open, and you've always had the key. You rise slowly, as if movement itself has grown philosophical. The study fades behind you, and now you wander the villa's eastern wing, where windows face a courtyard garden, and sunlight, soft and filtered, begins to comb its fingers through vines. The scent of rosemary stirs the air. Time feels syrupy here, gentle, forgetful. A bell tolls faintly somewhere far off. Maybe it's real, maybe it's just memory. You pause in front of a carved sundial. The shadow, thin as a thread, stretches across its face. Seneca, always alert to irony, loved sundials. He once joked that they're the only clocks that tell the truth slowly enough for us to understand it. Tonight's lesson is wrapped in that truth time slips, always. And most people don't live, they just delay. The Stoics, for all their formality, had an almost brutal honesty about time. Seneca, especially. He wrote one of his most famous works, On the Shortness of Life, like a philosophical slap in the face. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. That line stings more than any candlelit epiphany. You trace the edge of the sundial with your fingers. It's warm, worn. You think about how much of your life has been lived as prelude, waiting, prepping, optimizing. You've probably spent more time picking Netflix thumbnails than watching anything that changed you. Seneca would understand. He'd say, people guard their money jealously, but their time, they hand it out like free samples at a market. There's a minor story, barely a footnote in ancient records, that Seneca once canceled a meeting with a Roman senator because he wanted to stare at the garden and think about dying. The senator was offended, but Seneca wrote that it was the most productive hour of the week. It's unclear if that senator ever forgave him, but the anecdote sticks because it challenges something core: what counts as time well spent. Is it achievement? Is it hustle? Is it inbox zero? Seneca would say none of that. He'd say the time you spend sitting quietly, truly present, is wealth. Everything else is credit you can't actually cash. But here's the complication in our world. Presence feels like a guilty indulgence. Try telling your boss that you need an hour to stare at a tree. Try not checking your phone while waiting for toast. Try breathing, just breathing without needing an app to remind you. Modern Stoics still wrestle with this. Some urge productivity hacks, color-coded calendars, pre-dawn routines, deep work marathons, but others push back. They say Seneca wasn't trying to make you efficient. He was trying to make you awake. And being awake means noticing how fast it all goes. You sit now on a stone bench. A bee dances around the rosemary bush. You watch it, fully, its little legs dusted in gold, its whole mission unknown to you, but unmistakably real. You didn't schedule this moment, but it's happening anyway. That's the mystery. Time won't stop for you to make space for it. It just moves, quietly, powerfully, like breath, like sleep, like loss. Seneca wrote, "While we are postponing, life speeds by." It wasn't meant as a threat. It was a call to love the now, even if the now is small, even if the now is imperfect. You look again at the sundial. The shadow has shifted. It's only moved a little, but it's moved, and so have you. The courtyard's colors soften. The air feels like velvet soaked in light. You rise from the bench and walk toward a colonnade draped with ivy, leaves swaying like slow applause. In the distance, the faint echo of music, a flute maybe, drifts through the villa like an old story retold by wind. You follow it. Your steps are quiet on the marble. You pass frescoes faded by sun and years, scenes of gods and soldiers, of lovers frozen mid-laugh. The paint flakes gently, like memory peeling away its more glamorous stories. You enter a theater. It's not grand, just a modest amphitheater tucked into the villa's northern edge. The stone benches curve inward like an embrace. The stage is empty. The backdrop is sky. You sit near the top. From here, it all looks fragile, not broken yet, but you can feel it tipping that way. And that's the insight tonight. Beauty fades, art collapses, even the grandest structures burn. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't love them. Seneca, oddly enough, was obsessed with this idea. He wrote about the Great Fire of Lion, where half the city went up in smoke. He wrote about Rome itself, where entire theaters and libraries, works of art and mind turned to ash in a night. But rather than mourn them as sacred losses, he framed them as vivid reminders. If you love something, don't confuse it with eternity. You look around at the theater. Imagine it full tunic-clad citizens fanning themselves, vendors with dates and honeyed nuts, laughter skipping from stone to stone. It was alive once. Now it's memory. And yet, still beautiful. Seneca had a line often misquoted, usually misunderstood. What need is there to weep over parts of life? The whole of it calls for tears. But the tears, he meant, don't have to be bitter. They can be the kind you shed when something is so lovely. You almost can't stand that it will end. Here's a story from one of Seneca's letters. He once bought a sculpture for a dear friend, not because it was rare, but because it was crumbling. He found it more moving that way. It teaches more truth in ruin than it did in glory. He wrote, and here's where scholars argue, was he romanticizing decay? Was he hiding sentiment behind philosophy? Or was he just finally honest that beauty isn't in perfection, but in its dissolving? There's tension there. Some modern readers say Seneca sounds resigned, too comfortable with loss, but others, especially artists, see his words as freedom. You don't have to keep everything to love it. You just have to see it before it's gone. You lie back now on the stone bench. The sky above you is turning that pre-dawn blue, the kind that leaks into your dreams without knocking. The stage below you remains empty, but in your mind, it's full. Music swells. A play begins. Maybe it's a comedy, maybe a tragedy. Does it matter? The curtain rises. and you know even as it starts that it will end. But for now, you're here. You watch. You feel. You remember. And even as the wind stirs dust from the stage, you love it anyway. The theater dissolves behind you as you walk. The sky has lightened, not with sunrise, but with that ghost light that hovers between dreaming and waking. You're drifting down a stone hallway now, quiet as breath. It leads you into a smaller room, windowless, lit only by a flame no larger than a thought. A low table waits at the center, on it a dagger, sheathed in polished leather, and beside it a folded cloth. Nothing violent about it, just present, neutral, like a comma in the sentence of life. This was Seneca's nightly ritual, not the dagger part. Not yet, but the thought of endings. Every night before sleep, he imagined dying. Not in a macabre thriller movie way, but as a calm rehearsal, a philosophical lullaby. And that's our focus now, how imagining your own death can bring real peace. More peaceful, in fact, than lavender tea or deep breathing apps with soft gongs. Seneca wrote, "Let us go to sleep with joy in our hearts, as if we had lived a full life. If we wake, wonderful. If not, we have exited as prepared guests." That sounds intense, but to him, it was comfort. By facing death often, he dulled its edge. He didn't treat it as a surprise guest, barging in uninvited. He set a place for it at the table. And by doing so, he made each day feel borrowed, which means blessed. You sit down beside the table now. The dagger gleams faintly, unthreatening. You touch it, cold, solid, real, and utterly still. There's a story, one of the more chilling yet oddly serene, that Seneca used to lie in bed and imagine that his heart had stopped, that the day just finished was his last. He'd review it in reverse, each conversation, each irritation, each joy. Would he be okay if that was the last taste of the world? Sometimes the answer was no. Sometimes it was yes. But the ritual itself, that was the power. It's unclear whether he borrowed this from Pythagorean habits or from Egyptian death meditations, both of which played with similar nightly exercises. But Seneca made it his own, a practice of gratitude by subtraction. By imagining nothing left, he treasured whatever was left. There's debate among modern scholars about this. Some find it unnecessarily grim. Isn't that just anxiety dressed as philosophy, they ask. Others argue that, if anything, it's the opposite, a deep exhale, a letting go. Because if you've already faced your exit, you don't have to fear it all day. It's like checking the emergency exit on a plane. You hope you don't need it, but it's calming to know it's there. You lie back now, arms spread softly on the cool floor. The flame beside you flickers as if sinking to your breath. This is not a death rehearsal. It's a release rehearsal. Release of what? Control. Of expectation? Of the illusion that life is on layaway and not already in your hands. Seneca liked to say, "No man dies too soon if he has truly lived." It wasn't bravado. It was a reminder the clock is not your enemy, but you are your own thief. If you keep delaying presence, you breathe in. You let it out slowly, like mist curling off a blade. And for a moment, you're okay with all of it. The undone things, the weird things, the missed chances and the silly arguments and the glorious little details like the smell of old books or the curve of a peach. It's enough. If you don't wake, you've known this. If you do, tomorrow is a bonus level. You reach over and cover the dagger with the cloth, not because you're afraid of it, but because you've made peace with what it represents. And now, like Seneca, calm, tired, strangely content, you sleep. The world stirs again, not with noise, but with warmth. You find yourself outside now, walking beneath a row of cypress trees. Their tall, dark silhouettes cut up the early light like slow-moving sundials. Dew beads on the grass. Each step is soft, soundless, as though the earth itself is whispering. Ahead is a garden, not the grand sort, but a kitchen patch, parsley, lavender, onions, the kind of place where hands get dirty, where life grows because someone tends it, daily, without fanfare. And in the garden is a man, not Seneca, someone else, barefoot, wearing a tunic so simple it might be mistaken for a napkin. He's crouched beside the rosemary, weeding without urgency. You pause. This is the insight now. Real wisdom isn't always dressed in titles. Sometimes it shows up in silence, in soil, in the hands of someone society forgets to name. Seneca knew this better than most. Despite being a senator, a statesman, a man of letters, he often learned from people who had none of those things. There's a letter number 123 if you're counting where he writes to Lucilius about being gently corrected by a household slave. The man, unnamed by history, told Seneca that his tone had grown arrogant, that he'd spoken sharply to a guest. Seneca didn't argue. He wrote, "Who corrects the wise man is wise also." You think about that now as you watch this man in the garden. His movements are unhurried, deliberate, like he's not just weeding but meditating. You sit nearby, unnoticed, and the silence stretches, not empty, but full. Philosophers today still argue about Stoic hierarchy. How can a philosophy that insists all humans have equal reason also tolerate slavery? As Rome did, was it blindness, hypocrisy, a failure of imagination? Or was it simply the context they never escaped? Modern scholars push hard on this, rightfully, but perhaps Seneca's evolution, his listening, his humility offers a thread, not a solution, but a seed. He once said, "Virtue is not the exclusive property of the rich, nor of the freeborn, nor of the learned. It visits whomever invites it." And maybe it visited that quiet man in the garden more often than it did in the Senate halls. You close your eyes, listening now to the rustle of weeds being pulled. A bird sings from somewhere overhead, its melody simple and perfect. The sun rises with soft fingers, spilling gold across the rosemary. And still, the man doesn't speak. He just tends the earth, a kind of philosophy without words. You breathe in the scent of soil, of crushed green stems, of morning air laced with humility, and you think of all the wisdom that's been passed to you not in lectures but in gestures, in moments when someone looked at you with kindness and no need to prove anything. Maybe you've been the teacher too, once or twice, without knowing, just by showing up honestly, just by saying, "No, you go first," or "You're okay," or "Try again." The man in the garden stands, wipes his hands on his tunic. He glances your way. His face is unreadable, not mysterious, just uninterested in performance. And in that gaze, for a breathless moment, you feel it. You are not better than anyone. And that's what frees you. Not shame, but release. From comparison, from competition, from the nonsense ladder no one asked you to climb. He walks away, leaving the patch neater, richer, more alive. And you sit in the dirt and feel, for once, clean. The garden fades behind you, its silence lingering like a fingerprint. You walk once more into the villa's shadowed halls, past the same frescoes, the same gently sagging tapestries, but something shifted not in the house, but in you. You reach a small room near the back, a study, a sanctuary. It's hard to tell. The walls are bare. A single oil lamp rests on a stool. Its flame trembles slightly, though there's no breeze. And there, seated on the floor, hunched slightly forward, is Seneca. He's alone, and he's crying, not loudly, not dramatically. His face is turned just enough for you to see the tremble in his shoulders, the glint of wetness along his cheek, and that is the insight tonight. Even the calmest minds break. Seneca, often painted in our imaginations as a stone figure stoic, detached, imperturbable, wasn't made of marble. He cracked too. He bled. He wept. And he wrote about it. There's a letter number 63 where he reflects on the death of his friend Lucilius's brother. Seneca admits he cried for hours, and it surprised him. I didn't think I could grieve like this anymore, he says. But I do. He adds, let tears fall, but let them fall from the eyes, not the heart. A strange phrase, and one that scholars still debate. Does it mean to feel but not be ruled by feeling? Or to feel deeply but not drown? Or is it simply a philosopher's way of saying, I'm human, too? You sit beside him now. He doesn't acknowledge you, but not because you're unwelcome. It's because you're safe. Here, tears are not performances. They don't need applause. There's a tension in Stoicism, always has been. The expectation that to be wise is to be unshakable, that the sage walks through fire without flinching. But Seneca pushes back. He once said that the ideal Stoic doesn't not feel pain, they simply know what it is, and what it isn't. And pain he knew well. Exile, public disgrace, the loss of his child, the creeping weight of watching his student, Nero, slide into madness, a slow-motion betrayal that must have felt like failure tattooed across the years. Some modern readers accuse him of weakness. He should have left court, they argue. He should have defied Nero more boldly. But others, those with softer lenses, see a man doing the impossible, trying to remain a person inside a machine designed to erase them. You look again at his face. The tears are slowing. He breathes deeply, his rib cage rising like a ship's hull. Not defeated, just open, wounded but not broken. And you realize now, true Stoicism isn't about being untouched by the world. It's about letting the world touch you deeply and still staying whole. You think of the last time you cried without needing to explain yourself, not out of control, not as a spectacle, just release. Maybe it was behind a steering wheel, or curled under blankets, or in the shower, water hiding everything. Those moments, rare and honest, don't erase strength. They prove it. Seneca wipes his face gently, not with shame, but with grace. You see now that his tears haven't cracked his philosophy. They've finished it, because the Stoic who weeps, but does not shatter, has learned the most essential lesson. To feel is not to fall. You rise slowly, the lamp casting long shadows across the floor. Behind you, the quiet continues. Not emptiness, but healing. The floor beneath your feet cools again as you move onward, as if the villa itself is drawing breath. You pass through narrow halls and into a chamber draped with heavy cloth. It smells of rosewater and steel. Quiet music hums from somewhere far off, soft as a thread unraveling in the dark. The room is arranged like a stage. Candles flicker from sconces. A shallow tub sits in the center, its water tinged pink, not from petals, from blood. You've arrived at a strange place, beautiful, theatrical, utterly calm. This is Seneca's death. And yes, it's fashionable, disturbingly so. He was forced to die on Nero's orders. The details are Romanesque in their precision. Slit veins, warm bath, even possibly a touch of poison. A slow, deliberate exit in full philosophical costume. But here's the part that matters tonight. He chose to die well. And not just in silence, but in style. Not peacocking, not performative, but aware. Seneca, even bleeding out, had presence. He comforted friends, dictated final thoughts, asked for more warm water to ease the process, and all of it reads like someone trying to practice one last time the philosophy he spent his life writing. Death, he said, should be faced like an actor giving their last performance. That's not a metaphor. That was his script. And here comes the insight. A good life is one you can leave at any moment and feel complete. Modern philosophers are torn about this. Was it theatrical martyrdom? Was it genuine grace? Did Seneca really feel peace, or was he just too proud to tremble? There's tension, always. Some scholars argue his final words read too curated, that he clung to legacy even in his final hour. Others say, isn't that what we all hope for? To meet the end, not in panic, but in posture. You sit now on a stone bench along the edge of the chamber. You watch the candlelight shimmer on water. You imagine the courage it would take not just to bleed quietly, but to forgive the one who ordered it. Seneca did that too, not for Nero, but for himself. He said, "The man who fears death will never do anything worthy of a man who is alive." You run your fingers along the bench. It's smooth, cool, surprisingly comforting. And you wonder if you knew your curtain call was near. Would you be ready? Not your bucket list, not your resume, but yourself. Would you hold your own hand with tenderness? Seneca once wrote about rehearsing death daily, not out of morbidity, but to remind himself, if I die today, may it be without regret for having lived poorly. And that changes how you wake, how you love, how you forgive. You imagine now a scene more modern, your own room, far from Rome. Maybe it smells of chamomile and books. Maybe there's a cat on the windowsill. You're older, slower, but not bitter. You feel calm. Because you practiced. You lived like every goodbye might be a final one. Not in fear, but in appreciation. Seneca believed in beauty not just of form, but of exit. He said the final act mattered because it showed whether the whole performance was real. You look at the water again, the color, the quiet. You don't feel horror. You feel awe, because here even death bows its head, not out of sadness, but out of respect. The chamber recedes behind you like a tide pulling back into the sea. The floor beneath your feet shifts from marble to warm earth. Somewhere nearby, a breeze rustles linen curtains hung from an open archway, carrying the scent of baked stone, old books, and something citrus sweet, maybe orange blossoms, or just the memory of them. You wander now into a sunlit room where nothing is permanent, not even the sunbeam. It moves slowly across the floor as you do, touching, then leaving, lighting a corner, then forgetting it. And tonight, this is your reflection. Everything is borrowed. The Stoics said it with stern elegance, but Seneca made it tender. We do not possess what we enjoy. He wrote, we merely lease it. It sounds cold at first, but sit with it. You'll feel the warmth underneath, because leasing something means it isn't yours forever, but it's yours now. You settle onto a woven mat near the window, sun touching your ankle like an affectionate cat. Everything around you feels temporary in the gentlest way. The folds in the curtain, the cushion you lean on, the very breath you just took. Seneca would remind you none of this is guaranteed. The lungs may not inflate again. The window may not open tomorrow. The friend who texted may not text again. This isn't meant to sadden you. It's meant to awaken you. He once wrote of walking through a market and realizing each voice, each smell, each accidental shoulder brush was a gift that would expire by nightfall. And so he noticed them. That's the insight buried in his dryness. Impermanence isn't a threat. It's an invitation to look. But of course, we forget. We scroll, we rush, we plan for months we haven't met yet. We worry about what we'll own instead of what we're currently holding. There's a story barely a ripple in Roman history about how Seneca once refused to replace a cracked drinking cup. "It holds water," he said. "What else is it supposed to do?" That's not frugality, that's clarity. He wasn't trying to moralize your kitchenware. He was reminding you that function, presence, and gratitude often travel quietly together like shadows at dusk. Modern thinkers wrestle with this. Of course, some worry that seeing everything as borrowed leads to detachment, even emotional avoidance. But others argue the opposite. What you borrow, you cherish more, you care for it, you notice its nuances. Imagine holding someone's hand knowing this might be the last time. It doesn't shrink the moment. It expands it. You lie back now, watching the light inch upward on the wall. You trace cracks in the plaster with your eyes. They're not flaws, they're timelines. You think of your body also borrowed. The wrinkles beginning at the corners of your eyes. The aches you didn't invite but now greet like distant cousins at a family gathering. Seneca would say, love those too. They're proof you've been loaned something precious for longer than many receive. And eventually, like all good rentals, it will be returned. But that doesn't mean you treat it carelessly. It means you live gratefully. That's the trick. Isn't it gratitude not for what lasts, but for what visits? The next breath, the next laugh, even this moment now, wrapped in soft light, tucked inside a villa that may only exist in your mind. It's borrowed, but it's yours. For now. The light from the window fades behind you as you rise, slower now, as if time itself has asked you to be gentle. You move through a wide archway into the heart of the city, and suddenly, Rome is alive again. Not the postcard Rome of statues and chariots, but the messy, breathing kind, loud, fragrant, and mildly annoyed. You're standing in line at the Forum. Not for a show, not for a trial, just waiting. Someone's arguing about taxes behind you. A child drops a fig and bursts into tears. A goat, because of course there's a goat, nudges your leg with a look of undeserved confidence. And this is your insight now. Seneca found eternity not in solitude, but in friction. It's easy to be philosophical in quiet gardens, but life doesn't hand you gardens. It hands you queues, delays, traffic, and sticky fruit. Seneca wrote most of his letters surrounded by noise. Couriers rushing in and out, slaves muttering, senators shouting. He wasn't removed from life. He was tangled in it by birth, by politics, by ego. And still, he searched for calm within. There's a letter where he describes being stuck in a crowd, jostled on every side. He says the wise man does not hate the crowd, nor does he flee it. Instead, he observes himself, his reactions, his judgments, his need to be right, to be first, to be comfortable. You feel that now, standing here. Impatience rises in your throat like steam. You check well, you try to check your watch, but of course it's 2,000 years too early. So you wait. And in the waiting, something shifts. You notice the sounds, really hear them. The layered chatter, the grinding of cartwheels, the soft hum of sandals on stone, the goat chewing something suspicious. Seneca believed that the soul gains strength not by avoiding difficulty, but by moving through it with curiosity. And there's a story not often told about how Seneca used to purposely take the longest line when entering the baths, not to punish himself, but to train his attention, to watch his own annoyance, to let go of the itch to be somewhere else. It's unclear if this was a spiritual practice or just a really weird flex. Scholars disagree. Some call it ascetic performance art. Others see it as a radical commitment to presence. But either way, it poses a challenge. What if delays aren't interruptions, but portals? You inch forward in line. Someone shouts, a sandal breaks, a debate erupts about whether a fishmonger has overcharged a soldier. You breathe. You're not trying to escape this. You're inside it, fully. And in doing so, you found a kind of eternity, not the celestial kind, but the kind tucked inside an unremarkable moment stretched open by awareness. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer because we long for what is not, and neglect what is, harsh, but true." And so you notice your feet on the stones, the warmth of the sun on the back of your neck, the shifting weight of your body, the way your exhale softens the tension behind your ribs. Eventually, the line moves. The goat moves with you. And you smile because this wasn't a waste of time. It was time fully spent. You finally escaped the line. The form melts behind you like a dream interrupted mid-sentence. You wander now into a quieter street, still cobbled and sun-washed, with shadows that stretch like lazy cats along the walls. A fruit seller waves as you pass. Someone shouts, "Watch it," from an upstairs window. And then it happens. You slip. Your sandal skids across a banana peel. Yes, apparently Rome had those too, and you tumble with all the grace of a startled stork. The fall isn't tragic. It's not even painful, just deeply, hilariously human. You sit there on the warm stone, a little dazed, a little humbled, and here it comes. The absurdity, the fragility, the funny, floppy honesty of being mortal. Seneca would laugh. Not cruelly, not mockingly, but with a nod and a smirk, because he knew that even the wisest among us occasionally falls flat on our toga. There's something about folly that fascinated him, not because it was rare, but because it was inevitable. He once wrote, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces absurdity, for he has never faced himself." And there you are, still seated on the ground, sandals askew, ego slightly bruised, and somehow you feel better, lighter. Because for all your efforts to appear composed, capable, and calmly stoic, the banana peel has reminded you of something essential. You are not above this, and thank the gods for that. There's a fringe anecdote, possibly more fable than fact, that Seneca once tripped on the steps of the Senate and cracked his elbow. When someone asked if he was okay, he said, "Apparently, reason has no grip on marble." It's unclear whether he meant this literally or as a jab at the Senate. Probably both. But that's the charm even in embarrassment. He found insight. He didn't hide his stumbles. He analyzed them. He used them. He made a philosophy not just from ivory towers, but from bruised knees and awkward silences. Modern readers still debate whether Stoicism allows for humor. Is it too austere, too serious? But the evidence in Seneca's writing suggests otherwise. He wielded wit like a scalpel, poking holes in self-importance and inflated egos, especially his own. Because what Stoicism invites us to do is step back from our melodrama, to see the cosmic joke, to realize that most of what we panic about isn't a tragedy, it's a sitcom. And if we can laugh gently, compassionately, we're already halfway to peace. You pick yourself up now. There's a smear of something on your robe. Probably not dangerous, possibly grape. You dust off your dignity, such as it is, and start walking again, slower this time. Not from shame, from awareness. You look around, and suddenly, everything feels a little more alive. The uneven stones beneath your feet, the angle of the sunlight, the smell of bread rising somewhere nearby, a dog trotting by with a look of private mission. You chuckle softly, not at yourself, but with yourself, because you see now that the fall wasn't a mistake. It was a gift, a reminder that the philosophy you carry must fit in your pocket, not on a pedestal, that it must survive not just in epiphanies, but in banana peels. Seneca would nod, hands folded, eyes amused, and in that warm silence, you walk on, You walk now through Rome's outer gardens, where olive trees lean like thoughtful elders and the grass feels unusually philosophical underfoot. A butterfly zigzags past as if drunk on its own freedom. Somewhere nearby, a shepherd sings off-key, and you can't tell if it's a hymn or just someone making up words to feel less alone. You stop at a small stone bench beside a sun-drenched wall, overgrown with ivy. Someone has etched a crude poem into the rock, illegible now, but still there, a whisper from the past. And here comes tonight's meditation. Seneca often said, "Live according to nature," but nature never writes back. It's not that she's silent, it's that she doesn't explain. Seneca believed fiercely that the key to peace was aligning yourself with nature. Live in agreement with her, he wrote, and your soul will find its shape. A lovely idea. If only nature came with footnotes. But she doesn't. Instead, she offers paradoxes. Trees that rot to make way for new ones. Foxes that kill to feed kids that later die. Storms that destroy a village, but replenish the aquifer. Even this moment, this peaceful garden is borrowed. One dry season, one spark, and it could all vanish. So how do you align yourself with something so cryptic? Modern Stoics still wrestle with this. Some interpret nature as physics, cosmic cause and effect, others as divine reason, a kind of orderly logos. Some think it's just a fancy way to say, don't fight reality. But Seneca, he kept it both grand and personal. He'd say, look at the stars, then look at your breath. Both are nature. Both are trying to teach you something. You sit now, hands resting on your knees, and listen. Nature does speak. She just doesn't use your language. She shows you through endings when the figs drop early, when the sparrow dies, when the wind changes. She invites you to stop pretending permanence is a promise. And yet she offers gifts too. A clear morning after a storm. The way moss softens stone. The steady rhythm of your pulse when you finally let go of needing to understand. Seneca once wrote, "If you desire anything, desire only what nature gives freely," which sounds noble until you want something wildly specific, like a career promotion or the exact right reply to your text. Nature doesn't care about those. She doesn't send rejection emails. She doesn't ghost you out of spite. She just moves. And the more you demand explanations, the quieter she becomes. It's like trying to text the ocean. But if you stop asking if you just sit, she shows you her rhythms. A leaf falls. A bee lands on your finger. A breeze stirs a memory you didn't realize you'd buried. Nature is always broadcasting. We just don't always have the right receiver. You touch the ivy-draped wall beside you. It feels warm, alive. You notice the way its tendrils follow light, not logic. Seneca might call that wisdom. Not the kind you quote, but the kind you imitate. You don't need to decipher nature to align with her. You just need to unclench. To stop assuming your plans are superior. To stop thinking your grief is unnatural. To stop needing the garden to answer questions better asked in silence. You exhale now softly, deeply. The garden doesn't change, but you do. And that, perhaps, is nature's most generous reply. The garden slips away behind you like a sigh exhaled after good company. You wander now into a quieter wing of the villa, the kind with thick stone walls that hold the cold even when the sun is bright. Scrolls are stacked in tall wooden racks, no titles, no colors, just the smell of time well spent. A small desk waits by the wall, its surface bare except for a single object, a calendar. Not a modern one, no glossy photos, no motivational quotes, just squares scratched in ink, days marked with a patient hand. But most of them are crossed out, some with a single line, others with thick strokes. as if whoever made them wanted to make very sure that time was truly gone. You sit before it and study the marks. This is your insight now. The calendar is a lie. Seneca saw this clearly. The pages, the months, the names we give days, none of it holds time and place. We build little fences to corral something that never agreed to stay. He wrote, "We are always getting ready to live, but never living." You can almost hear him now, raising one very Roman eyebrow at your to-do list. Because the illusion is comforting, isn't it? January brings resolutions. Monday promises discipline. September feels like a fresh start because the stationery aisle tells you so. But Seneca would say you're outsourcing meaning to numbers on a page. Time doesn't care about your planner. It doesn't even recognize it. There's a story, perhaps apocryphal, possibly invented by some cheeky Stoic, that Seneca once ignored the entire Roman calendar for a season, showed up to meetings on the wrong day, refused to acknowledge holidays. When asked why, he replied, "I wanted to see if the world would still spin." It did. And the message lingers: we are so busy managing time, we forget to be inside it. Modern thinkers still wrestle with this. Some argue that structure helps us flourish, that calendars keep us sane, that planning is an act of self-respect. They're not wrong. But Seneca would argue that structure is only helpful if it brings you closer to life, not just to productivity. And most of us, we count days like coins and forget to spend them. You lean back now in the chair. One of the scrolls slips free and unrolls at your feet. No titles. Remember, just ideas, ink and breath. It reads, "The one who fears losing time never owns it." You let that sit, because you know what it means. Not in theory, in practice. The way you delay joy for when things calm down, the way you tell someone you'll call them later this week, the way you plan vacations like they're proof you've earned rest, instead of acknowledging that rest needs no receipt. Seneca once likened time to a river strong, unbending, and indifferent. You don't stop it, you don't bottle it, you ride it, or you drown. And here, in this quiet room, with the calendar's lies exposed and the scroll whispering truths, you finally ask the real question. What would it look like to live now? Not next month. Not after you're promoted. Not once you've read the right book, healed the right wound, or finished folding the laundry. Now, you trace one of the crossed out days with your finger. It's gone. A ghost square. But it asks you gently, were you there? Did you notice? Maybe you did. Maybe you didn't. But you're here now. And that's all Seneca ever asked. It was it. You step back out into the air, leaving the shadowed calendar room behind. The sky above is wide now, unclouded, almost cocky in its brightness. Rome unfurls in all directions, domes, rooftops, distant hills curled like sleeping lions. You climb a set of stone steps worn shallow by years of ambition, regret, and sandals. At the top, a platform opens before you, a lookout, perhaps, or just a place for breath. From here, the whole city looks small. And this is your next reminder. You are not the main character. Harsh, maybe, but freeing, absolutely. Seneca didn't phrase it that way, of course. His Latin was a little more refined, but the message echoes through his letters like a bell struck softly, and often, you are a part of the cosmos, not its purpose. And once you understand that, you stop needing the story to revolve around you. You take a seat on a crumbling edge of the lookout. A breeze catches your robe and lifts it slightly, as if nature is checking in to see if you're listening. Below, people move like ants, tiny dramas unfolding in forms and alleys, lovers arguing, a merchant's haggling, someone somewhere is late for something, and none of them know you're up here. None of them care. And that's a kind of grace. Seneca saw self-importance as a trap, No man is more wretched, he said, than the one who believes the world owes him a role. There's a story likely exaggerated but too delightful to ignore that Seneca once sat through a playwright's performance who had clearly modeled the protagonist after him. Every gesture, every moral, every bit of dialogue oozed Stoic heroism. Seneca left before the final act. When asked why, he said, "I've already played myself once. I don't need an encore." Whether he actually said it, who knows? But the point is sharp. Your job is not to be the center. It's to be in alignment. Modern philosophers tug on this thread with vigor. Is Stoicism encouraging humility or apathy? Should we really dissolve the self to that degree? But Seneca's version isn't about vanishing, it's about right-sizing, knowing when to step forward and when to get out of the way. You look again at the city below. No one applauds, no one films, no one offers you a monologue opportunity. The pigeons, unbothered, coo softly nearby. And yet, you don't feel diminished. You feel relieved. Because carrying the narrative is exhausting, always trying to make sense of everything, to arc your life into tidy meaning. Seneca would say, stop looking for the plot twist. Just act well in the scene you're given. You remember a friend who once laughed at you mid-rant and said, "Not everything is about you." You were annoyed then, but now you want to thank them. Because it wasn't an insult, it was an invitation. To breathe, to listen, to see yourself as part of the chorus, not the star. You let your head tilt back and feel the sun warm your face. Maybe today, your role is to observe, to bear witness, to let someone else shine, to walk through your own life like a guest who respects the host enough not to demand constant spotlight. Seneca would call that wisdom. You call it relief. And from here, perched quietly above the city, you feel the gentle shrinking of the ego not as a loss, but as a return. You descend the lookout slowly, each step echoing a little longer than expected, as though time itself is stretching the moment. The air is thicker now, with that stillness that settles after deep reflection. The city noise softens behind you. You round a corner, and there it stands, a statue. Tall, serene, cloaked in marble folds that mimic motion. It's a man, or a god, or maybe just a once famous somebody whose name was chipped off long ago. You run your hand along its base, cool, ridged. You feel the texture where lichen creeps in, quiet and unbothered. This is the thought waiting for you here. Even the statues will crumble. Seneca would have nodded, not grimly, but with curiosity. He spent years in the presence of Rome's grand monuments, its carved ideals, its freeze-frame attempts at forever. And he knew, better than most, that forever was not the business of men. "We erect tombs," he wrote, "but they house only memory's dust." There's a story about the temple of Jupiter, how the gold leaf peeled faster than anyone expected. Visitors began calling it Jupiter's sunburn. When told of this, Seneca reportedly shrugged and said, "Even the divine peels under pressure." That may be a joke, but the insight stands. What we build on borrowed time. And that's not failure. That's honesty. You stand now before the statue and notice its cracks. A missing hand, a chipped nose. Wind and rain have done their slow work. Years carving where chisels once had their moment. And the irony is, it's more beautiful like this. Not because it pretends to be perfect, but because it doesn't. Seneca often urged people to meditate on impermanence, not to depress themselves, but to loosen the grip. "Look at that which was once praised," he wrote, "and see it now, silent and unnoticed. So too shall we be." It's not an insult, it's an equalizer. And yet, modern minds resist this. We crave legacy, likes, a footprint that doesn't wash away. "I want to matter." We whisper to the void. Seneca whispers back, You already do, but not in the way you think. Because what lasts isn't what we carve in stone. It's how gently we stood beside others before the rain came. You reach up now and touch the statue's shoulder. It's slightly warm from the sun. You imagine the sculptor, long gone, shaping this curve with care, not knowing that centuries later, some dream walker in soft shoes would pause and feel it. Maybe permanence is the wrong question. Maybe the real art is knowing how to disappear kindly. Seneca said the wise man welcomes collapse not with joy, but with understanding, that a cracked wall is just an invitation to rebuild differently, or not at all. You take a step back. The statue looms still, but you see through it now, not with your eyes, but with acceptance. It was built, it will crumble, and that's not tragic. That's whole. You walk on, leaving the statue in sun and shadow. A pigeon lands on its head, indifferent to legacy. And somewhere, Seneca chuckles softly. The sun dips lower now, gilding the edges of rooftops, brushing warm gold over aging walls. You follow a narrow street that slopes downward, the kind of path where echoes stretch longer than footsteps. There's something solemn in the air, but not heavy, just still. At the end of the street, a modest doorway opens into a private courtyard. Vines hang low. There's a wooden bench under a fig tree, its branches curled like reaching fingers. You sit? This is where he knew. Where Seneca received the news you must die. Not tomorrow. Not next year. Now. By imperial order. The man who spent his life preparing for this moment, rehearsing death like an actor blocking a scene, had finally reached the third act. And tonight's reflection settles gently across your shoulders. Advice from a man forced to die still, whispers louder than 1,000 lectures on how to live. The philosopher who wrote, "Death is the last thing that should trouble us," now had to prove it. He didn't protest. He didn't plead. He prepared a warm bath. There's a softness to this that scholars still can't quite pin down. Was it courage, compliance, pride? Maybe all three, braided together like the vines above your head. Seneca chose to meet death not as a victim, but as a host. He invited it in, dried the good towels, made space. He even offered final thoughts to those gathered around words for his wife, for his students, for the silence that would follow. Life, he said, is like a play. It matters not how long it lasts, but how well it is acted. That's not stoic detachment. That's a poised presence. It's unclear whether he really died as peacefully as the records claim. Some accounts say it was slow, even painful. The bleeding took time. The poison failed to work. He was old, and his body resisted. But his mind, it held, it didn't flinch. And that's what matters here. Not the clinical details, but the philosophical texture of his goodbye. He lived his end like a conversation already written, one where nothing needed fixing, just finishing. You look up at the fig tree now. Its fruit hangs heavy, dark purple and full of sugar. A few have fallen. One bursts softly beneath your foot. Ants find it almost immediately, a quiet communion of hunger and gift. Seneca believed death was a release, not a punishment, not an intrusion, but a friend who waited at the door, always patient. We avoid that door. We pile things in front of it, plans, distractions, hope, but he would urge you to open it just once, peek, nod, not to rush toward it, but to befriend it, and in doing so, to live more honestly, more awake, because when the worst thing is no longer a threat, every other worry becomes smaller, not insignificant, just manageable, like waves lapping instead of crashing. You lean back, hands resting on the bench. You wonder what would you say, if this moment were your final one, what would remain unsaid? Would you stall? Would you soften? Or would you, like Seneca, step into the water with quiet dignity, smiling not because you want to go, but because you've made peace with the fact that you will? The wind picks up gently, the figs sway, and the courtyard listens. The fig tree fades behind you, its branches whispering to the sky. You wander now into a corridor sun-bleached and dust-soft, with broken tiles beneath your feet that wobble just enough to remind you perfection is not required for peace. There's a window ahead, high and square, just wide enough to frame a sliver of sky. In the windowsill, curled, motionless, except for the occasional flick of a tail, is a cat. She blinks slowly. She doesn't move. She's not meditating. She's just being. And this is tonight's lesson, soft as fur, sharp as claws. The cat in the window doesn't care. Seneca would love her. Not because she's stoic in the strict sense, but because she embodies something deeper, unbothered presence. Not numbness, not detachment, just the deep, purring confidence of something perfectly fine with not understanding the plot. You move quietly closer. The cat watches you. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't greet. She simply includes you in her awareness, then decides gently that you are not important enough to react to. There's a philosophy in that. Seneca wrote often about indifference not as apathy, but as measured involvement. He said, "He is truly free who neither hopes nor fears." That's the cat. She doesn't hope you'll pet her. She doesn't fear that you won't. She is curled in a square of sunlight, and that is her kingdom. There's a lesser-known letter where Seneca describes watching a house cat. Yes, they had them. He observes how it ignores chaos, a dropped plate, a political argument, a fire in the distance. The cat stretches, yawns, and repositions itself slightly closer to the warmth. And Seneca writes, almost envious, it wastes no time on what does not concern it. Modern minds struggle with this. We're told to care, to be engaged, to react constantly. But Stoicism asks, to what end? If you feel everything about everything all the time, what's left of you? The cat knows. She has limited bandwidth. She spends it on sunbeams. Seneca would argue that your serenity should not depend on external events, elections, emails, the comment section. You're allowed to be aware and unmoved. Not from cruelty, from clarity. The cat blinks again. You sit on a low stool across from her, not speaking, just breathing, sharing space. And you realize, strangely, that this silent feline may be your finest Stoic teacher yet, because she doesn't chase what isn't hers. She doesn't mourn what passes. She doesn't need your approval. She is content within her square of light. You think of all the times you've twisted yourself to care about things you can't control, the spiral of worry, the imaginary arguments, the theater of stress. And for what? Seneca would gently suggest, let it go. Most of it isn't yours. He even kept a list mental, at least of indifference things that don't affect virtue, and therefore shouldn't disturb peace. Fame, wealth, reputation, the number of figs in your pantry. You look at the cat. She doesn't care about any of those. She cares about warmth, clean fur, the rhythm of breath. You reach out, not to pet her, but to mirror her. You place your hand in a beam of light. You notice its shape, the way your fingers cast soft shadows. You stay still. The cat closes her eyes. Lesson complete. The sun has tilted further now, casting long golden rectangles across the stone floor. You rise quietly from your seat beside the cat, who remains exactly where she is, her indifference a kind of gift. You leave her there, curled in serenity, and move once more through the villa's winding halls. It's quieter than before. You reach a doorway that opens into a wide, candlelit room. Soft cushions line the floor, as though someone meant to host a small gathering and then forgot. A half-finished cup of wine sits untouched near a windowsill. The scent of myrrh hangs in the air like a memory you don't quite want to remember. And here, you feel it. The hour is late. The party is almost over. This is Seneca's final lesson in hospitality and humility. Know when to leave the gathering, not in bitterness, but in grace. He likened life to a banquet. Rise and depart. He wrote, not when you are still hungry, nor when you are stuffed, but when the meal has been well enjoyed. You sit now on one of the cushions. Everything around you feels softened, used, honest. You think of all the times you stayed too long. In conversations, in arguments, in jobs, in relationships whose endings knocked for months before you opened the door. Seneca didn't want us to flee life. He wasn't an escapist, but he warned of clinging, of becoming the person who demands an encore when the symphony has already bowed. There's an anecdote, real or exaggerated, that Seneca once left a grand imperial feast mid-meal. When asked why, he said, I wish to leave before I start resenting the taste. Modern thinkers still wonder, was that wisdom or weariness? Either way, the point remains to part with dignity, not because you're too good for what remains, but because you've had enough, and you know it. You lean your head against the cool plaster wall and listen. Somewhere, distant laughter, a flute, the soft murmur of wind through a high window. It's not sad. It's gentle. Seneca saw death not as a punishment, but as a punctuation, the final period in a sentence carefully composed. He believed we err most not in dying too soon, but in refusing to accept the end of a chapter. And it's true, isn't it? We cling, we archive, we screenshot. We try to extend moments like they're elastic, stretching them across days they weren't meant to survive. But not everything is a series. Some stories are short, and beautiful, and complete. You reach for the cup on the sill. It's room temperature now, the flavor probably dulled. You don't drink, you just hold it for a moment. A simple object in a simple moment. You think about how different life would feel if you treated every ordinary scene as a closing one. Not with drama, with tenderness. Seneca once asked, would you rather be dragged out of life or walk out under your own power? And here, in this candlelit room, you understand. It's not about timing. It's about posture. You rise now. The cushion remembers your shape. The cup stays behind. You don't need to take anything with you. You've had your fill. And the next guest, they'll bring their own light. You slip back into the corridor, now hushed like a final chapter unfolding. The air feels thicker here, filled with memory and dust motes that drift like ancient snow. The villa, once grand and echoing with ideas, is softening around the edges like a dream unraveling gently before waking. You take a turn and find yourself in a narrow side chamber. The ceiling has cracked in two places. A broken urn rests in the corner, surrounded by petals blown in from the garden pink. It wilted, still fragrant, and in the center of the floor, someone has drawn a spiral in the dust. You sit beside it. This is tonight's final flavor of impermanence, even after loss. A smile remains, because punchlines don't need permanence to land softly. Seneca knew tragedy, but he also knew irony. Dry, wry, quiet as a ghost joke told in passing. He said, life is a play. What matters is not that it is short, but that it is well performed, even if it ends in laughter among ruins. This was not denial, it was dignity. He didn't cling to hope as something grand. He treated it more like a houseplant, something to water, but not worship, and sometimes to repot when the roots outgrow their container. There's a fragment less known where Seneca recounts a friend who lost everything in a fire. The friend, standing amid the ashes of his home, had the gall to laugh. When asked why, he said, "At least the rats have nowhere to hide now." Seneca didn't scold him. He wrote that moment down, preserved it, because sometimes in the aftermath, humor shows up not to belittle pain, but to make room for breath. You trace the spiral with your finger now. It curls inward, like thought, like memory, like grief turned soft at the edges, and somewhere deep within it is a smile you weren't expecting. Seneca had one too. He believed that impermanence made room for delight, not because things last, but because they don't. A fresh loaf of bread, a child's mispronounced word, the first sip of wine after a hard week. You don't need these things to endure forever. Their charm is that they vanish. And yet, there's always a flicker of return, a different laugh, a new sunrise, a friend who says something so wildly true and stupid in the same breath that you can't help but snort wine through your nose. That's life, too. Even after loss, even when the walls crack and the plans collapse, there's always one last chuckle echoing in the ashes. It's not cynical. It's sacred. Modern thinkers sometimes read Stoicism as grim, too tight, too clean, but they miss the corners, those little footnotes of absurdity that remind us you can cry and laugh in the same sentence. Seneca did. He encouraged it. Because even the grandest philosopher is still just a human with a bladder, a bad haircut, and the occasional tendency to trip over their own sandals. You lie back now. The spiral is beside you. The ceiling creaks softly overhead. And the dust, the petals, the memories, they all swirl together into something that isn't tragic. It's just human. You smile. Because somehow, despite everything falling apart, it's okay. Oh sure, the villa is almost gone now, dissolving into the twilight like breath on a mirror. The walls you passed through so many times are shadows now, soft impressions folding into the night. You don't walk anymore, you float. And you're not alone. Seneca is there too. Not as a statue, not as a ghost, just as presence. His steps are slow, steady, like they're walking not across a floor but across time itself. His robe rustles softly, like a page turning, and together, without speaking, you pass under a colonnade washed in starlight. This is the last path, the closing note, the dream that doesn't end. Seneca always wrote with a strange kind of urgency, not the rush of fear, but the clarity of knowing there's no guarantee of waking. Begin at once to live, he urged, and count each separate day as a separate life. Each one, a complete life, with its own rise and fall, its own humor and ache, its own final breath. You step into a garden without gates. The moon hangs low, as if waiting. Trees arch overhead, their leaves rustling in a language older than words. Seneca gestures to a bench beneath an olive tree, and you sit. He does not speak. He doesn't need to. Because this is no longer a philosophy. It's a presence. It's the kind of stillness you only find at the bottom of things after grief, after laughter, after thinking has folded itself into quiet. This is where knowing becomes feeling. You look down at your hands. They are your hands, and they are also centuries old. They've held joy, let go of things, written letters no one read, built and broken and built again. You place your palm to your chest, still beating, still yours, still now. And Seneca nods not to affirm, but to say, yes, this is it. He taught that impermanence is not to be feared. It is not a curse. It is not a trick. It is the soil from which calm grows. It is what makes the moment you are in this exact one precious. because you do not own it. You can only dwell in it. You look around the garden once more. The stars have multiplied. The silence has deepened. You no longer feel the need to move, to explain, to figure out what comes next. Seneca rises slowly. He turns to go. And as he does, he whispers, not aloud, but in your mind's quiet ear, you are already home. So now, no more rooms, no more courtyards, no more marble floors or fading scrolls. Just breath, yours, slow, soft, trusted. You're no longer walking, you're floating, or maybe even resting deeper than that in that sacred middle ground where the body sleeps, but something inside you still listens, gently. The stars above have blurred into mist. The city has grown quiet, as if it too has set down its burdens. Even the birds have stopped asking questions. And you've done enough for one life tonight. The lessons don't need remembering. The stories don't need sorting. They're already part of you now, folded into your breath like twilight, folded into the folds of Seneca's robe. You're not trying to hold on anymore. You're not rehearsing what to say. You're not wondering who you'll be tomorrow. You're just here, and that's more than enough. Let the ache of the day melt now. Let the names and the roles and the open tabs in your mind drift quietly toward the door. Nothing urgent is waiting. Nothing is owed. The spiral of thought slows. You do not need to be wise now, or calm, or even awake. You just need to be as you are, as you've always been beneath the noise. Let your next breath fall gently, like dust in a sunbeam. And if dreams arrive, let them borrow your hands for a little while. Let them carry you into gardens that never fade. Let them speak without words. Because even now, even as sleep takes you fully, Seneca would whisper one last thing. Nothing real is ever lost.